Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into system design for iOS applications, and we're specifically focusing on the implementation of an analytics manager. This is actually inspired by a great Medium article written by Soham, and we're going to reference this as we go. So we're not just going to break down the high-level system design, but I'm going to highlight what I think it does really well, and then go into areas where I believe it could be significantly improved. So whether you're an iOS developer looking to level up your architecture skills, or you're just curious about designing robust iOS applications, this one's for you. So let's jump right in. And before we jump into breaking down this diagram, let's go ahead and get an idea of what we would be asked to do in a potential interview setting. So an interviewer could simply ask you, how would you design an analytics system to implement an analytics layer in our app to track events? Tracking an event might look like tracking when a user logged in, when they were last active, when they viewed a particular page, so on and so forth. And as part of the requirements, let's go ahead and look at the idea that Soham writes about in this article. So we should always start by gathering requirements, and they're pretty simple. But in our case, the analytics manager should be agnostic to any analytics libraries. The basic functionality should not be impacted if we need to add new analytics libraries in the future. So we want to be able to potentially add multiple analytics services. Something from Firebase, maybe Mixpanel, maybe a custom service, so on and so forth. So from a high level, it should have a function to track events, which would capture the corresponding event. And that's pretty much the idea behind what we're trying to do, guys. So next up, we jump into high-level design. So this was his diagram. I built out my own to get a better representation of the interaction between these components. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we can start with our models. So the event would look like this. It simply has a name and some associated properties, which is just a key value structure. It could be like user ID and a value, timestamp and a value, so on and so forth. And this is pretty like type agnostic. It's a simple dictionary, so that's good. I like how this was modeled out. Next up, he has an analytics type enum, which represents all of the different analytics services we could potentially have: Firebase, Mixpanel, so on and so forth, custom, AWS, whatever it may be. And guys, next up, let's go over sort of this high-level design with what the system would look like. So we would want to implement this analytics service, which would be some sort of protocol, and we would inject that into something like an analytics manager. And then we would have services that implement this analytics protocol. So this is what is known as dependency agnostic. So let's go ahead and take a look at what Soham says about this. So the analytics manager has to be decoupled from any other components, and it has to be testable. So we must follow protocol-oriented programming, or POP. So that's where we come into this analytics service. It's a simple protocol which has a few properties and methods. Now, if we want to add any analytics service, we must conform to it by implementing that. And we saw in our diagram, we have like a Firebase service and a Mixpanel service, so on and so forth. And then comes the analytics manager. So that's the gateway of using the analytics services. So we're going to use dependency injection and dependency inversion as part of the solid architecture principles to implement this service inside of a manager. And the manager would be what the actual view components call on to fire off those analytics methods. So if we go back here, that's exactly what we're doing. We have this protocol, it's implemented or injected into the analytics manager, and that is dependency agnostic. We are not injecting a concrete type, but rather an abstract type. So we can inject anything that conforms to this protocol into this analytics manager. These are the conforming services, and we could add any number of these services, right? And then, guys, in our view layer, these views simply implement the analytics manager and call the analytics methods. So pretty straightforward, right? So let's go ahead and take a look at what this actually looks like in the code. So here, guys, we have the analytics service. It's a very simple protocol. And like I said, I'm going to be breaking this down and going over what I think it does well and what I think it could do better. And then, guys, we have the Firebase analytics service, and this is just some implementation of that protocol. And the Mixpanel analytics service, which is just another implementation of that protocol. And it has all the same methods, and we get to implement them differently. So here we would track event with Mixpanel. Here we would track event with Firebase, right? And back to the analytics service, it just has track, unset to maybe undo a function, and a function to initialize our services as well. And this is all code directly taken from the article. So, and then it has this associated type T, and we get whatever analytics type we're looking at there. So next up, we can take a look at our models. This is our event, pretty straightforward. This is our analytics type, mixed panel, Firebase, heap, custom, whatever, right? And then guys, we have our manager here. And like we said, we initialize this or, pass along our services. And Soham chose to do this through the use of an array and implement a singleton here and have this initialize function that passes in these analytic services and takes in our application and launch options to help us initialize those services. And then here is the actual implementation. We track an event, we can track multiple events, or we can unset an event. And then inside of our view layer, we have our content view, and we could see here, this is the actual consumption or call site for using our analytics manager .track event. And this is what an example event would look like. Homepage viewed, user ID, session ID, timestamp. And then we can also go to like a detail view by going there and take a look at that. And it's just another implementation of that track event inside of another view, detail screen viewed with some list of properties, right? So we have a pretty basic system here. And just to go back to our diagram, this just describes exactly the exact implementation of what we just looked at in the code. This is just a visual representation of how we structured our code. So now that we've gone over that high level design, I want to go over what I think is being done well and what I think could be done better. And there are definitely some significant areas for improvement here. So let's start off with the good stuff, right? I definitely like the use of this analytics service protocol. It makes our code dependency agnostic. That way we can inject anything that we want into this analytics manager that conforms to this protocol. So this is a scalable system, right? We don't depend on any concrete types with this manager. We have a good implementation of these in our views. And if we want to add additional services, we have a very clear structure of how to do so. I also like this event model here. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. I don't like this analytics type enum. I don't think this is needed at all. And we'll get into that in a little bit. And I really want us to jump into the code to go over the things that I don't like about the implementation of this system. So let's go ahead and get started with that, guys. So I'm going to jump into this analytics type enum. And as I was mentioning before, I don't think we need this at all, right? This violates the open closed principle of the solid architecture principles that states type should be open for extension, but closed for modification. So basically anytime with the way this code is set up, I wanted to add an additional service, I would have to come in here and modify this enum and then make changes to my code anywhere this enum was implemented. So I personally believe that this is completely unnecessary. If we want to implement new services, we just need to create a new service file and conform to that protocol. And we shouldn't have to care about what analytics type we're looking at, right? So that's improvement number one that cleans up the code quite a bit. So that's going to cause some errors. I believe that, actually, no, I don't think it will. But in this protocol, we also have a completely unnecessary use of this associated type and this analytics type, guys. So I believe we could delete these altogether as well. It just adds unnecessary complexity to the code. We don't gain anything from having an associated type there or an analytics type enum, right? So I'm going to try to build the code just to see if we get any errors here. I think we should still be fine. Oh, no, we're not. So yeah, in our Firebase analytics service, we no longer need to specify that this is of type .firebase, right? So we can just delete that, and we can do the same thing in the mixed panel service. So once again, that type enum didn't do us any good. Our code still functions exactly as expected or as needed here. We can still implement these track functions however we need to with Mixpanel or Firebase or whatever functionality we need. And we didn't need to use that type enum. So that's improvement number one. So let's try to build our code again. Everything should still work. No, we don't. Analytics manager. Yes, see, I believe this is why he did this. You wanted to track events for a specific type, but that should not be the responsibility of the manager here. We shouldn't have to pass in any sort of type to this function. That should be left up to the implementation of the services themselves. So track events, we could just pretty much delete all of this code. And we could just track these events any way we want to. We could say like Firebase service.track this event, Mixpanel service.track this event, if we needed to track multiple events at the same time. So now if we build our code, I think we should be good to go, and our build succeeds. So that's great. So that's improvement number one. We did not need to use that analytics type enum. It added the unnecessary complexity to the code. We didn't gain anything from it, and it violated the open close principle of the solid architecture principles. So the next improvement I would make here is I really don't like the implementation of the injection of these services. And in combination with that, the use of this singleton. This isn't true dependency injection because we're utilizing a singleton here. And that is evident in this private initializer that we have. We have to utilize this initialize function, which is not clear to anything that consumes this analytics manager. So if I go into where I actually initialize this thing into my app file, guys, in my app delegate, this is where I initialize this and then ultimately have to pass in these services. So to start this off, why I don't like the use of an array here is because my code would still compile if I pass in a completely blank array. So if I go here and I build my code, you'll notice that it succeeds and I'm not passing in any services into this array. So that is a huge point of weakness in the way that this is set up. We definitely want to make it so that we are properly implementing dependency injection here. So I would get rid of that array initializer altogether. And let me show you guys what I would do. I would make an init here that took in my Firebase service, which is just some analytics service protocol or analytics service, and my Mixpanel service, which would just conform to that analytics service, right? So that's how I would implement the initializer here. And ultimately that would also result in me removing this static instance of my manager, right? You can't get dependency injection and use a singleton. Those two things do not go together. They are oil and water. You can't have one with the other. So I would delete this altogether and delete this private initializer as well. So that sort of ties into that point I was making with this array initializer that we have. And I would make instances of these services. So I would say private-let Firebase service. And that would just conform to my analytics service protocol and my Mixpanel service here. And I would say self.firebase service equals up my Firebase service and self.mixpanel service equals my Mixpanel service, right? So that's what I would do there, guys. And then to initialize this thing, let's go ahead and take a look at how we could rewrite our code now. We could then say, let manager equal our analytics manager and pass in our Firebase analytics service and our Mixpanel analytics service. And we could then set this, we'll go over how I would actually utilize this inside of the view environment in a little bit as well. But this is now true dependency injection, right? So now we are actually following this dependency injection pattern where we are injecting these services into our analytics manager. And if I wanted to add another service, I would just need to add that as a dependency to my analytics manager. And now I won't be able to initialize this thing without passing in the required services, right? So before we could pass in an empty array of services and our code would still compile and our analytics just completely wouldn't work, right? And obviously we could write tests to make sure that that doesn't happen, but this is a much better implementation in my opinion. We remove the need for a singleton and we are sticking to dependency injection. So that's point number 2, I believe we're on. 2 or 3, doesn't matter. And then guys, guess what? We get to completely remove the need for this initialize function, which comes into my next point. I really didn't like that this had dependencies on UI application and launch options. It made it so that we had to import UI kit into our manager, which is not something that we should have to do. So I don't like this in any bit, way, shape, or form. And the Firebase service, right, or the analytics service also had a dependency on this. And this is not a good implementation here. Like this protocol should not have any dependencies on UI kit. One that tightly couples us to UI kit. Like what if we want to use Swift UI? here, we wouldn't be able to do that with the way that this was set up. And two, generally our interfaces shouldn't need to know anything about our UI layer, right? So this is coupled to our UI layer, and even more specific, it's coupled to UI kit, and that's overall just bad. So I would delete that altogether and delete this UI kit import as well. And the implementation or the initialization of our services should just be left up to the service themselves. So we should just write init methods here and initialize our service, right? And if we needed to initialize something like Firebase, we should just do that at the app layer. So that is how I would implement that there. And once again, with Mixpanel, you could say init, Mixpanel, init, right? So that's another big improvement I would make there. And if you guys look here, we no longer need these initialize functions that have dependencies on a UI layer. So we could remove all of this stuff as well. So that's another major improvement there. So let's hop back into this manager and see where we're at, right? We no longer need this function. We no longer have to do any sort of looping through our services here. So here we would just say, if we want to track an event, I would then have to say like Firebase service.track event, and Mixpanel service.track event. But I also particularly don't like this implementation because to me, this violates the single responsibility principle. Like this analytics manager is responsible for implementing multiple services, and this track event function, I could see why Soham implemented the event type and the event array thing, because then you could potentially track events with specific services. But you know, that shouldn't be left up to the caller to figure that out, right? I think we should implement separate individual analytics managers for each service. That creates like a one-to-one relationship between a service and a manager instead of a many-to-one relationship where you have multiple services being injected into one manager. So I would potentially do this, guys. I would say like Firebase Analytics Manager, and we copy and paste all this. And then I would say Mixpanel Analytics Manager. And I think this is better because, like I said, it forces us to adhere to the single responsibility principle. And here we would then just need to inject our Firebase service like this. And then this would be unique to tracking events in Firebase, right? And track events, I don't think we really need that. And here we would just say service.onset. And we would essentially do the same thing in this guy. And this would be our Mixpanel service. So like I said, like this for multiple reasons, because each one of these managers now has a single responsibility, right? And we don't have to add multiple things to multiple managers. We have a one-to-one relationship between our services and our managers instead of a many-to-one relationship where we had many services being injected into a single manager. And then guys, back in our app, we could then create individual managers, right? Individual analytics managers. So this would then look like this. We could say like, let Firebase manager, and it would be Firebase Analytics Manager. We would say Firebase Analytics Manager, Firebase service, right? And it's important to note that these managers still have this agnostic dependency on an analytics service rather than a concrete type. So we get to inject anything that conforms to just this service here. And that to me is a better implementation. Last but not least, guys, I want to go over how I would update our code to inject these analytics manager into our views. If you remember, we removed the use of our singleton. And I'm going to be doing this from a Swift UI context. Obviously, we would have to do something different if we were working with UI Kit. But what I would do here was for this manager, I would make this an observable. And I would just import observation up at the top here. And make this observable as well. And in my app, I would initialize these on the app level and set them as environment objects or on the environment of my content view. So it would look like this. I would grab my Firebase guy. I would create it as a state property. And I would say var equals And we could say Firebase Analytics Manager. And let's copy and paste this, and we could do our Mixpanel Analytics Manager and create that the right way. And this would be, you guys get the gist. Let me just type this out so we don't get any errors. Mixpanel Analytics Service. And we're good to go there. And then, guys, I would say .environment, Firebase Analytics Manager, .environment, Mixpanel Analytics Manager. And then inside of my views, I would be able to utilize this as an environment property. So I would say Firebase Analytics Manager.self, Firebase AM, we could call it, var. And here I would then be able to simply say Firebase Analytics Manager.track event, and boom, we're good to go. And this way, guys, I could leave the implementation of these things up to the views that need them, right? So we also want to make sure that we're not violating the interface segregation principle of the solid architecture principles, where my content view might not need Mixpanel. And I can choose to do that or implement Mixpanel if I need to. Like this guy might need that. So I could say at environment, Mixpanel Analytics Manager.self var Mixpanel AM. And then I could go here and say Mixpanel AM. And this might not need to know anything about the Firebase Analytics Manager. So before, we had our interface that might have had things we didn't need it to know about in the individual views that are consuming the managers that they may or may not need. So guys, overall, those are the improvements I would make to this system design structure that we have here. I think that this is a much better implementation. Obviously, once again, this has a caveat of me coupling this to SwiftUI. That's just what I choose to develop in now. I don't build apps in UIKit anymore. And if you were building this in UIKit, it might be a good idea to utilize a singleton pattern, but that doesn't change the fact that I would have still made a lot of the same improvements. That's just really how I chose to implement this in a SwiftUI context. But that's going to wrap it up for this video, guys. Once again, this was inspired by Soham here with this article. The link for this is in the description. You guys can go through and take a look at how he did things, and then go back through and look at the improvements that I made. And let me know what you think in the comments. If there's anything that you think that I didn't do well or could do better, that's sort of the whole purpose of having these system design discussions. There's always a different way or different approach to accomplishing the same thing. And that's a big part of these system design interviews. And I actually plan on doing a full system design and interview prep course for all iOS engineer level guys. So if you're interested in something like that, leave a comment below. And guys, make sure you sign up on the website at stephancodes.com if you are serious about leveling up your skills as an iOS developer, and if you want to stay up to date on all of the content that we are releasing. Our students are getting hired at top companies, and you can too. Or if you simply just want to build an app and release it to the App Store, we have everything that you need. So we have a bunch of awesome professional courses here that you guys can get access to by becoming a member. We'll talk about that in a second. We have a Pro Plus tier, which teaches you how to build apps that can handle millions of users at a production level. We also have more basic Pro app clones of a bunch of these awesome apps that you can build and learn through building real world examples here. And then we have a bunch of fundamentals courses as well, guys, for things like Swift Concurrency, SwiftUI. If you're just getting started with programming, I'm assuming you're probably not watching this video, but we have something for everybody. So guys, thanks for watching this video. And if you want to get started with us as a member, go ahead and sign up for this low monthly cost. You get access, unlimited access actually, to all of our pro content. It's honestly a great deal. For a low monthly cost, you get access to thousands of dollars worth of material. And it's the best way to learn if you guys are serious about becoming an iOS developer, whatever your goals may be. So thanks for watching this one, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. And make sure you stay tuned for upcoming courses that we have. I got a lot of exciting stuff coming this year. Goal is to make at least 150 YouTube videos and release a bunch of awesome courses to help you guys become better coders. So like and subscribe, hit that notification bell. We'll see you in the next one, man. Peace.